English is the international language spoken all over the world with a rich history and many variations. How have we got to where we are with English today, and what are some of the interesting things worth knowing about this global language? Well, let's unpack it right now as Ticker Ed starts right now.
Ticker Ed, in association with Enquiry Tracker, empowering schools to manage and grow inquiries and online enrolments.
Hello and welcome back to Ticker Ed, where we will be unpacking all things education from K to 12 right through to university. And whilst Enquiry Tracker, the Inquiry to Enrolment software solution, is the presenting sponsor of the program today, all of the opinions expressed in the following segment are of course our own. And joining me now is my regular co-host and founder of Enquiry Tracker, Greg Campitelli. And today's topic is the English language, the main language of instruction in education for many countries. But what's changed and how has it evolved? And yeet, lit, fam, I don't know.
Well, I tell you what, firstly, the slang that you would have used when we were growing up is probably not the same slang that they're using today. It's constantly changing. In fact, language is really changing, not much over the last 20 years, but phenomenally over the last few centuries. And our guest will unpack a bit more when he arrives. But historically, language comes from many different languages. English is borrowing from languages all over the world. It's dynamic, it's constantly evolving, and one of the great challenges I think for educators is to keep up with that change.
Absolutely.
And it's often coming from the young people. So, for example, many words that we're using right now today have changed fairly recently. Let's think of a few. Cloud. Well, that's a thing up in the sky, isn't it?
Correct.
But it's also a data storage centre. Footprint. You leave a footprint in the sand, but now it's a carbon footprint. It could be anything that leaves a trace. A tablet, for example, was always something it took in medicine, but now it's a sort of a touch screen. And text was always something that you read on a page, but now it's a device that we're texting on our mobile phone. So it's this constant state of flux, and an Inquiry Tracker, we really understand the importance of language and communication.
And keeping up with all of that. And of course, for educators, it's ever changing, as you mentioned. It's dynamic, but isn't that how it's always been? Is that a modern thing?
No, it's not a modern thing. It's always been that way. Let me give you a couple of, they call it language drift or language change.
Drift,
yes, even
right.
that's a nice turn of phrase. But meat, for example, used to refer to all types of food,
right,
not just beef, pork and chicken, etc. A hospital once meant a house or lodging for travellers, which is the word where we get the word hospitality.
Right.
Makes sense. And I'll give you another one. Cute, for example, once meant sharp or quick-witted, where the phrase, "Don't get cute with me, Mike Loader," comes from.
Oh, okay, right.
And here's another one, potholes. You think about potholes in the road?
Yes.
Well, where did that come from? In the Middle Ages, of course, roads were the easy part to access. That's where you got the clay to dig up and make your terracotta pot. So it left a pot hole. Fascinating.
No,
it's fantastic.
Keep going. Give me more.
I think
they're really cool.
I reckon. This is all about the change of language. So let's bring in our guest. I think I know him pretty well.
Perfect timing to bring in our guest. And Steve Campitelli is not only the brother of my co-host Greg, but also works as an academic advisor at the University of Melbourne, holds a Masters of Applied Linguistics, and has worked in language and linguistics for over 25 years. Welcome to you, Steve. How are you?
Thanks, Mike. Thanks, Greg. Great to be here.
Now, this is an exciting episode. Let's start off, Steve. Can you tell us a bit about that history of the language that Greg was alluding to before and I was quizzing him on?
Absolutely, Mike. And the point you guys make about it being a changing dynamic thing is never more illustrated than what we can see in the history of the language. And it might surprise a few people to know that English has changed a great deal over the course of its history. So essentially, the Anglo-Saxon Germanic tribes migrated from Germany and the places they were living out there. The Angles, the Saxons, that's where Anglo-Saxon language comes from, the Anglo and Saxon tribes, and the Jutes in the 5th century. And those Germanic settlers became dominant in England. And it's also worth noting there was no England as such then. There was no entity called England until the 900s. And these German tribes supplanted the existing Celtic languages, which didn't make the transition. They died out. Not many Celtic words survived in English. And of course Latin, which was around from the Roman invasion around 44 BC, AD, up to about 410. And so those Anglo-Saxon languages became dominant. And then Viking raids. The Vikings from Scandinavia came over to England about 800, and they brought Scandinavian language influence with them. And so what we have then, the bedrock of English, the basis, is the Anglo-Saxon Scandinavian words, which form much of the common language. Okay, and I'll illustrate that in a minute. The Norman French invaded in 1066. You know that famous date. Most people do know it. And from then on, we saw a three-tier language system, where we had the nobility speaking French, Latin for the church, and Anglo-Saxon for the common English folk. And again, which gives us that mix of languages or language forms we have today, where we sometimes have three language levels. So, for example, ask is the lower form of Anglo-Saxon, question is the mid form of French, and interrogate is the higher form of Latin. Another example, king is Anglo-Saxon, royal is French, regal is Latin. So we have these simpler forms being Anglo-Saxon and the higher forms being Latin, French. Break versus damage, come versus arrive, job versus position. Again, not many people may know that, but those combinations give rise to the language we speak today. But just finally on this, Mike, you talked about it. If you and Greg were saying if you went back in time and were able to go back to the 800, 900 years ago, you would not recognize the language. So right up until the late 1400s, the mid to late 1500s, Shakespeare's time, before that, you would not have recognized English for what it was then. By the 1700s, 1800s, you'd have no problems.
So, Steve, English is now borrowing heavily from other languages, not just what you've described, but talk to us about where it's borrowing or pinching those words from other languages. Perhaps unlike some of our other languages, like French doesn't really borrow very much, but we borrow heavily from those kinds of languages, don't we?
Correct, yeah. English is a shameless taker, Greg. As you say, unlike French, which actually has set up an academy to protect its language, English has no such thing. And it's estimated that over 70% of the modern English vocabulary has been taken from. They call them loan words, but they're actually taken because we're not giving them back. Probably in no small part due to the British Empire, of course, and its depth and breadth meant that language was coming in from the empire, but also, the willingness of the language itself to accept change. Okay, so for example, just to name very few, we have cameo and carnival from the Italian, coco and cannibal from Spanish, pistol and the classic robot from Czech, bonsai, gyo is a Japanese, kindergarten hamburger from German, and of course, as you would have seen in the graphic before, in the Middle Ages, in the Renaissance period, you had a lot of infusion of Latin and Greek words that make so much of modern English, and they came into the language at that period of time.
That's so cool. I've just looked up robota from Czech, the Czech word. I'm learning a lot today, Steve, so thanks for jumping on. What odd things are there about this language that might be trouble for a new speaker or somebody perhaps picking up the language and learning it?
Oh, Mike, there are many, and I've been involved in English language education for a long time now, and I sometimes scratch my head and think, how do they cope with this? So there's this thing of words in English with no opposites. So I was talking about this with Greg the other day, and we were laughing about it. So we can say uncouth, but we don't say couth. We say, I'm disgruntled, but I don't say, hey, I'm feeling gruntled today. Disgusting, not gusting. Off-putting, not pudding. Ruthless, not Ruth. Why? It's so interesting. We have another set of words called, and you may have never heard of this, called contronyms. Words which mean the same in their opposite form. So, for example, cleave means to both split and to stick together. Both derive from separate Old English words, okay? Greg will like this one because he does this sort of work. Consult means to both give and to get advice, okay? The opposite form. Another one, you're at the airport, you're working with a form. To fill out and fill in a form mean doing exactly the same thing, despite the fact that they're opposites. And I think we have a slide on the next one. Are we able to put that up? This one kills me. If you're learning English, what do you do with this? The O-U-G-H sound. So in rough, the sound in rough, the ow in plough, the oo in through, the o in though, the or in thought, and the in thorough. and I think we have also the hiccup, which is spelled a little bit differently nowadays, but that's another one. Mike, it makes it difficult, doesn't it?
Absolutely, when you break it down like that.
I was at university when I was walking around university in Tasmania when a chap, and we're looking at all these facilities, and he said, see that building over there, Greg? And I said, yes, I nodded politely. He said, we're retiring that stock. Really? Retiring it? You mean you're going to knock it down? So, you know, I mean, it's incredible, Steve. What are some language trends? Give us some, what's going on?
Well, there are a few, Greg, and as we've established on the program so far, that language is dynamic. And I know at Inquiry Tracker, because I've done a lot of work with you, that you guys really understand this, that how language moves and evolves. But there are trends. Some of them interesting, of course. The big one you've just alluded to is the nouns into verbs trend, which has been a business pushed thing, I guess. This is a couple I've heard lately, to stand up a program, meaning to start a program. We're going to stand the program up, to sunset something. I got an email from Google Analytics saying they were going to sunset Google Analytics. Meddling at the Olympics, to text someone is a verb, to text. To friend someone, to stream something. And then you've got words where they may not have had that context before. For example, to socialize a document, to refresh your CV, to take something offline, meaning to take it out of a meeting.
Steve, there are so many of these things. It's so fascinating, but I am just aware of the time, but I wanted to thank you for joining us and educating us in this space. It certainly is it's a deep, deep rabbit hole we can go down, but thanks again for your time.
A pleasure. Happy to be here.
All right, Greg, some top tips from you just before we wrap up.
Well, firstly, languages are fundamentally dynamic and are in constant state of change and flux. Be aware of and open to these new forms. Embrace them. And tech and digital age means this is happening faster than ever before. Embrace it. Don't be frightened of it.
Fantastic. Well, let's get lit and yeet our way out of here that was awful. Greg, thanks for joining me on the program.
Pleasure,
Wonderful
Mike. Cheers.
And to all of you out there, thanks for joining us, and I look forward to seeing you again soon. Don't forget to check out what the team at Inquiry Tracker has to offer at their website. I look forward to seeing you again soon. Be well.